Yep. Cool. So thanks, Austin, for joining to chat about settings and how it affects the product. Why we're talking today is that our group is now taking a look at the initiative to improve the GitLab settings experience, and we wanted to get your feedback and insights on some of the stuff that you've been working on in compliance and certify. Yeah, with that, if you could just help us get some insight on what you looked into in the past.
Yeah, definitely. So one of the big components, I talked about this a little bit in my UX showcase yesterday. Settings and administration of settings are important for different areas of compliance. Some of those might include things like protective branches, merge request approvals, push rules, so on and so forth. And some of those things are well and good at the project level, but they also exist at the group and instance level in some cases, or don't exist in some cases. And so one of the things we've been focusing on as a group in compliance is trying to create some more parity across the different layers. So that's been one of the first challenges we've been trying to address. So like if you can't create a merge request approval rule, for example, at the instance level, we want to be able to at least bring that in at the instance. And then there's no way to create any approval rules at the group level. So then it becomes, how do we introduce those settings? And then how do we deal with inheritance? Because it seems like it varies a little bit depending on which setting it is. Sometimes it applies to all projects, sometimes it doesn't. And so then what do you do, for example, with push rules, where if you set them at the instance level, they don't get inherited by all the projects that already exist on that instance. But let's say you're a company that has thousands of GitLab projects. That's not super helpful for the administrator that wants to make swift changes across or be able to quickly change each one. They're going to be responsible for, what I would imagine is like keeping one tab up so they can look at their admin settings and then going into each project and making them match that. So we're trying to make some of that work easier so that compliance isn't so painful to manage. That'd be maybe like a high level overview of some of the things that we're trying to accomplish. One thing that I shared in our our compliance weekly meeting, I was digging through Hayana's Epic, and I was trying to call out a few of the issues that we would want to consider potentially picking up alongside some of the work that we're already doing, because we're either already touching those components in settings and it could be something that we just tack on. So as an example, like I know we're going to work with protected branches. So do we also want to just fix the table while we're there? I think there are some opportunities like that. So as you can see, like a lot of these associate to that same topic that I was sharing with you. But that's kind of like the main crux of everything that we're trying to deal with. How do we create more parity between the different layers? How do we give the people that manage instances and groups more dexterity to make changes or observe the different settings across different projects? And I think I'd asked somewhere in the UX co-working channel, or maybe it was just the UX channel, but I didn't know exactly what our pattern was in terms of like defining settings. So if we're going to introduce another setting at the instance level, is the default behavior, this should not be inherited by all projects, or should it be inherited by all projects? I think there are just some of those lingering questions that hadn't necessarily been answered definitively, at least.
Okay. So what did your group go with? Or what was the final solution? Or like, what's the current direction that your group is going with for the apply that show all scenario?
So we're trying to match whatever behavior is there today. So for an example, we're not trying to change the push rule settings in terms of how they're inherited. So at the instance level, if you set them up, they're not inherited by projects. We're not going to change that. Instead, we are going to drive from the compliance dashboard a way to understand which projects aren't matching the instance level. So we wanted to give them the button to like set back projects to the default that was set at like the instance or group level. But for introducing merge request approval rules into the group layer, we're gonna just copy what is at the instance level, which is like it does get inherited by projects that have a matching compliance framework label. It's very confusing, but we're trying to at least keep in step with what's already there, and then hopefully we can work on standardizing across different settings in the future.
How do you keep track of the cascade effect across the different levels? Like you have instance groups and projects. Like how do you um, do you have like a spreadsheet or anything like that to like say like if this is set and this is set, then this link opens or this thing shows up or this thing will bad things happen?
Mm-hmm. The stickiest one has been the merge request approvals between the instance and project level. So we have like several videos of me trying to break down the logic of it. So it's not in an Excel sheet, it's probably in like a Loom video or on Unfiltered.
Yeah.
And I've tried to also break it down in Figma to show like how it would percolate across the different layers. So I don't think I have any specific documentation myself, but I know the engineering team is like, it's a spaghetti mess in the backend side.
Cool. Perhaps after this call, you can link to one of these videos where you're talking about the complexities, because
Sure.
I think that'd be useful for myself
Mm-hmm.
to check out.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'll have to dig around and find the right issue, but I'm
Yeah.
sure it's somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah.
Cool. And what's so you just did your UX showcase on creating improving the parity levels and giving
Mm-hmm.
like better dexterity for people managing to
Mm-hmm.
observe and see the different settings across the different levels. What is that slated for the next few milestones, or is that specifically 13.6 or?
Yeah, I don't know exactly which milestone it's all going to go into. I'd have to probably pull up our planning issue to figure out where it's coming from.
Mm-hmm.
But some of those things were just kind of, some of them were solidified in 13.5 and solution validation, so they would be going into planning breakdown. Some of them are still, I believe, in solution validation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's still some time before they're actually going to reach the build track.
Okay.
Uh,
Cool.
yeah.
That's good. So I don't know if you've seen this, but yeah, I think having guidelines on how to do settings, I think the thing that you raised today was like, how do you handle like this select all, or like this, how do you handle cascade? Like we don't want to
Mm-hmm.
have different patterns for that. And
Yeah.
yeah, over part of this initiative is documenting those patterns and like, you know, if you need to do this pattern, and like keeping it
Mm-hmm.
consistent across the product. I think that would be
Mm-hmm.
really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And we now have a area in pajamas to like document that stuff, so that's a good sign for us in our maturity level of
Yeah.
documenting things. But yeah, that pain of figuring out which settings is the gold standard to follow, because it's
Hmm.
slightly different everywhere. It's a
Hmm.
common problem for all of us designers. Yep.
Yeah, totally. I thought of a much more granular example of something that hasn't necessarily been fully defined yet in terms of how do we configure this to the different layers. But say you're an administrator and you want to change like the default merge request approval rule to require at least two people. You can't really do anything today, but how do you set it so that no one can change it in the future? At least keep it to a minimum of two.
Mm.
So trying to figure out how do we allow the administrator to not only set the sensible default, but also potentially lock it down so that it's just everybody's going to use the same rule, and they can add additional rules, but they don't ever want to allow it to become any less strict than two would be the example I can think of. Like I know we've had a couple customers be like, we have projects that can use zero and we want all of them to be using at least two. Um, so it's like something relatively simple, but yeah, it's hard for them because they have to go into every project today, bump it up to two, and then hope the maintainers don't change it.
Right. Right. That sounds crazy. Especially if you have many projects, right? So, and
Right.
that's when it gets
Right.
unwieldy.
Yeah.
Cool.
If you're like GitLab and your whole project is on one, then no big deal. But if you're in an enterprise where you have thousands of projects, then it becomes a real hassle
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah. So that covers that part.
So, a question I had maybe for you, since you're talking about the fact that you guys are taking on settings in addition to navigation, would you still want us to consider as a group to take on a couple of these issues that I've outlined here, or
um,
maybe not?
yeah. I think if it aligns to like
Mm-hmm.
your group scenario of, for example, that protecting a show role user when protecting a branch,
Mm-hmm.
that's definitely something that if it fits your scenario, then yeah, go for it. What our group is trying to look for right now is taking some of the low-hanging fruits that was in the recommendations,
Mm-hmm.
but the bigger part is probably like setting the guidelines or structures. Like, so we're thinking high level and saying, cool, these are the common problems, this is what we're going to solve. And as it
Mm-hmm.
gets more granular, so let's say the specific settings for your group, we're not going to tell you what to do there. We might just say, hey, Austin, here's the neo guidelines, and like try to apply this to your group
Mm-hmm.
for consistency, like sake. And then there might be some edge cases in your scenario where you're dealing with different instances, or the cascading is like different than how other teams are doing it. So that
Mm-hmm.
cool, we'll like jump in and like help out with that. So um, that's kind of what we're doing with settings. And then with that, it has close relations to how you navigate between settings, whether it's at the instance level down to the project level and all that stuff. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's another scenario where um, we might leverage more insight on your team to understand how that works,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can come up with a more general solution, and then we might leave it to you to like assist in guiding us in how to make it better for specific scenarios. So yeah,
Yeah, certainly. Yeah.
this list of things that you've highlighted, yeah, feel free to tackle that, because um, we do see a scenario where we will end up delegating part of the
Mm-hmm.
work to the specific stage groups.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'll work with Matt, my product manager, to see how he can fit in some of these things. Like some of them seem very easy, like fixing the border color of
Yeah.
the table. Yeah.
Hmm.
If we're touching the table already and adding things to it, yeah, we can
Mm.
just change the CSS there.
Yeah.
But we'll see about some of the other ones that are a little bit more complex and see if it
Yeah.
makes sense. Because a lot of these, like we don't own necessarily the responsibility for a lot of these.
Mm.
It just happens to be that we might be touching that part of the code base. And so it's just convenient for us. If we're already there, we might as well add a little extra value to the quality of life.
Yeah. Yeah. Feel free to ping the Slack group or myself when there's like
Mm-hmm.
parts where like settings is an interesting one because historically no one group really owns it, right? So it's like one group might like it connects to all the groups, but no one group really owns it.
Yeah.
So bigger changes is probably in our remit of Arena where it's a larger overhaul that's like
Mm-hmm.
too big for one group like yours who are focused on a certain user feature,
Mm-hmm.
delivering user value in that way. Tackling such a big thing and settings is not a good use of your time. That's probably more suited to our group. So
Gotcha.
yeah, I think raising stuff like that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Um,
Cool.
we have a little bit of time. Do you want me to give you just a little show and tell of like the merge request approvals?
Sure, why not? Let's go for it.
See, pull up an example here. Okay. Okay, so some some of this might be a bug, some of it is intentional. So merge request approvals on the right hand side, this is what you see fully flushed out at a project level. On the left side, I'm at the admin area and the instance level. You only get these 3 checkboxes as things you can configure. And what this section does explicitly is if you select a specific framework, the projects that are using one of these specified ones will inherit the settings. No other
Mm-hmm.
project inherits anything.
Gotcha.
So some of the settings are kind of confusing. Like this checkbox is associated to this checkbox, but they're doing the exact opposite. So if this one is unchecked, this one will be checked. We're going to fix it. We're going to clarify the UI text because it's non-obvious. So this is a good example. I have settings set for GDPR. This one is not a GDPR project, so I'm going to switch it over to one. And then it should inherit the settings. So yeah, see opposite behavior here. And then it also puts these into a read-only state, so you can't change them. So that's how you're saying like, okay, for GDPR projects, these things should be unchecked. All projects have to follow these rules. It just sets the guideline to keep teams building safely.
Okay.
Um,
And that question mark tooltip, does that say that this can't be overwritten because it's configured by the framework?
no, but that is something we're going to be adding in. We'll be adding in an alert to provide some info saying that the settings that are read-only have been set by the instance level or the group level to give some clarity to whoever is within the settings so they know why, because I'd figure it out. Yeah, there's some more oddities, like the rules are currently put into a read-only state and you can't add any new ones. That wasn't necessarily intentional. We still want to allow for the
More
addition
if
of new rules, right? Yeah, we don't want to restrict adding rules, but also we want to be able to take these, like this like approval rule section, bring it up so that the administrator can configure some defaults to be inherited. So this is just a great example of like, clearly there's a lot of difference between having all of the available merge request approval functionality at the instance level It doesn't exist at all at the group level.
Hmm.
And so that's an area that we want to help clean up, clarify some of the UI text, and make it a little bit more sensible, if you will.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that one will be going in probably in the next couple of releases.
Hmm. Cool. Thanks for showing that, because I probably would never see that ever. So appreciate you walking through this and
Yeah.
explaining the nuances of the checkboxes, because that's something I'll probably never figure out.
Yeah, I know it's confusing, and hopefully by the time you get around to it, you don't have to worry about it. We do have a lot of good ideas in terms of like improving just some small things, like putting these checkboxes in the same order, having all the same checkboxes present, using the same text.
Mm,
I think sometimes just like little additions here and there, you don't necessarily
mm.
notice the discrepancies between it until you look at the big picture and you're like, oh, these don't look much the same at all anymore, and we need to fix that. So
Cool. Cool. Thanks for that. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And any
Um,
other time you run into anything like that, we can always talk
mm,
about it, especially if I've helped touch it. I might be able to provide some more context or not. But yeah, it's weird because like we don't own merge request approvals. I think that's like source code or something. I don't know which group owns it. Let me see where this one goes to, because I think it does have the group.
looks like
Yeah,
source code. Yeah.
yeah. So source code owns it, but we're trying to like improve some of the administration of it. So it's
Mm,
kind of a weird. We have to really collaborate with a lot of different teams that own these different parts of the app to make sure like we're not breaking their entire experience.
right.
But yeah, so far it's been good.
Cool.
But yeah, hopefully it's helpful, Michael, and anybody
Yeah.
that is watching as a follow up.
Cool. Thank you very much for your time. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Talk to you
All
later.
right. Bye.